All right. And yep, looks like I actually hit the record button this time so we can kind of start over. We've been having a really good discussion so far. Everybody, welcome to the Labor Knots podcast. Thank you so much for those folks that are listening to the first time or watching us on YouTube. This whole Zoomcast during COVID-19, during quarantine, is something that we think is important to do, but it's also new to us. So if you're listening to us and the audio doesn't sound that great, our apologies. We're doing our best. And same thing if you're on YouTube and you're watching us on YouTube and we don't look that great, that's because we're not really used to this.
This is just how we look.
This is just how we look. Yeah, we're working class people. This is how we look. There's no Photoshop in this. Today we've got a guest from calling in or zooming in from pretty far away. We've got Jack Milroy with us. Thanks for joining us, Jack.
Thanks, Carlos. It's great to be here from a really long way away down in Newcastle, Australia.
I was going to say, tell us, we've been friends for a while, and you've actually been on the Labor Knots podcast before, but why don't you tell folks what you do and where you are?
Yeah, so I have been on this podcast before, and I was thinking about when that was, and it was, I guess, just over a year ago, and we were at a convention. I don't remember which convention. Was it the BC Fed convention in Vancouver?
Yeah, I think so. I think, yes. I think we had, the Labor Knots probably had some sort of awkward setup on a high table. Or something
it definitely feels like a different world, that is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess it was. But so I am a consultant. I work with primarily labor unions, but then also some nonprofits and advocacy groups doing digital engagement and member engagement. So I work with unions to set up kind of like digital programs, email, social media, data, and then, really with the goal of better engaging members, having really good conversations with members, doing digital organizing, all the things that have now become even more important than they were. And so it's a really interesting time in amidst all the like tragedy and chaos. And I'm down here in Newcastle, Australia. So we came down here just less than a year ago, had our second child down here. This is where I grew up, in the city of Newcastle. It's about, folks in Canada, it's about the size of Victoria, BC. So it's about 500,000 people. And it is home to the world's largest coal export port. And it was the home of the BHP Steelworks for a very long time, which shut down when I was a child. So it's an industrial city and a port city, and it's very beautiful and very working class. And the background that you can see behind me is actually from a famous incident about 10 or 15 years ago. There was a 1 in 100 year storm and flood, and that is a giant container ship that washed up on the beach.
What?
And it took it's called the Pashabolka, the MV Pashabolka, and the storm was so big it washed up into the beach. And then because of, I guess, like how sand works, like the suction on the boat was so intense that they couldn't get it out for like weeks or months. I can't even remember, but it was a crazy time, and it's kind of iconic in the city's history. So I thought it would be fitting.
I love it. It's a cool shot. As soon as you started saying kind of like where you are, what kind of work goes on there, I was wondering if that's what the background was, but interesting. For those of you that are just watching on YouTube, it looks like a massive ship getting beached, essentially, is what it looks like. So what are things like, and so for people to kind of know where exactly we're at, so today is April the 7th here in Canada. Let me just go to this trusty app. Here in Canada, we are at 17,872 cases of COVID with 377 deaths, and good news, 3,478 people who have recovered from this virus. Where are we at in Australia?
In Australia, as of today, we're at 5,919 cases with 48 deaths and about 2,500 recovered.
And so I guess, like, when is the timeline for you folks and us? Is it pretty much being on, like, how long are you guys in a complete quarantine, everything shut down kind of phase?
Yeah, we basically are. I think we're pretty much where folks are in most of Canada. So if you're in Ontario or BC, I think we're in a pretty similar place to that. I mean, it seems to me like different jurisdictions use different language. Some call it a lockdown, some don't. You know, really though, what matters is the restrictions. So like, I think that Australia and Canada reported their first case on the same day, back in January or whenever that was. And then of course there was no growth really for a long time, and we thought, you know, maybe this will be okay. And where we're at really now is we had an explosion of cases in mid-March, like a lot of places. Australia had actually closed its border to China in early January, to slow arrivals from there when the virus was bad there. And so where we're at now is, you know, similar to, you know, Canada. Our borders are basically closed. We have also significant restrictions on movement between states. So you can't basically cross any state borders in the country, except between Victoria and New South Wales, the two biggest states, which is where the most cases are. So there's really no point containing things there. But basically, you know, restaurants and pubs are closed. You can only do takeaway. Cafes the same. You can still go to you know, obviously grocery stores, pharmacies. You can still go to a hardware store, although there's kind of strict like distancing rules. But basically, yeah, we're shut down. We're told to stay home, go out for exercise once a day. You know.
Yeah, it sounds similar to British Columbia, although there's folks that are listening and or watching from other parts of Canada that are in kind of a different situation. I know, and we were talking before, like in Quebec, they've got a complete shutdown of non-essential businesses. In BC,
Actually,
we're still holding up. Go ahead.
I was going to say one difference, actually, that's worth mentioning is that in Australia, schools are still open, and
Interesting.
childcare, daycare is still open, which I know is the case in parts of Canada around daycare as well. Obviously, at schools, attendance, I was talking to some teacher friends, and they're saying attendance is like less than 10%, which makes sense. A lot of families are just choosing to keep their kids home, and there's online learning modules that are delivered. The same learning is delivered if you're in school or if you're at home. They're just operating off the same modules. And in the case of childcare, as of last week, childcare just became free in the entire country until the end of June.
Oh,
So
wow.
anyone who was paying for childcare now doesn't have to pay for it, and they can keep their place whether they attend or not. So it's essentially like a short-term nationalization of the childcare sector.
And is the childcare sector there, is it mostly public there, or is it kind of a mishmash? Is it a public-private system?
It's a mishmash. So
Okay.
there's you know, private for-profit operators, there are non-profit operators, and then there are a bunch of operators that are provided by local government.
Hmm.
So local cities and municipalities. So yeah, there's a real mishmash. So the
And
funding
so,
model is weird.
yeah, and so it was the government just kind of saying, no matter what situation you're in, daycare is covered type thing, or childcare is covered.
Exactly. And it was, I think, you know, partly it's driven by trying to reduce people's costs as unemployment rises. But I think the real concern coming from the sector was that the sector could collapse if people pull their children out and actually cancel their place. Um, Subsidies to centers are tied to how many children are attending and paying, and the entire sector may collapse in the short term. And then, you know, it's really hard to restart an economy if you don't have a childcare system.
Well,
Um,
and I'm sure part of it too is kind of keeping people, like folks that are going to work, particularly in essential services, like what happens if their kids can't go to school, right? Like I know that's a conversation that I've had with a few folks here, um, before the schools got shut down. And I
mhm.
know in Quebec, I'm not sure if in other provinces they're doing this as well, but I know in Quebec, what they've actually done is opened up kind of childcare facilities specifically for healthcare workers and like first responders and folks that are needing to go to work because they're essential service. They're opening up these childcare centers specifically for those groups.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And for a while there, I thought that was the way it was going to go here. But I guess they made the call that most folks aren't sending their kids anyway. If they can, like if they can be home with them, they're kind of doing that. And then for folks that are essential workers, whether that's in healthcare or grocery or wherever, they're still sending them, and as they should. And it seems to be at this point there's no outbreaks linked to any schools, no community transmission linked to any schools or childcare centers. And so until that happens, it seems to be a fairly low risk of these centers or these schools
Yeah, it'll be really
spreading
interesting.
the virus.
It'll be really interesting on a bunch of different levels how we analyze the decisions that are being made, kind of country to country, province to province, region to region, and kind of looking back at all of this and seeing kind of what worked, what didn't. Because the reality is, I think many of these governments and many of us as individuals are essentially guessing. Like,
Mm,
we're trying, I mean, we're guesstimating, so we know how serious this could be, but nobody at the end of the day knows exactly how this is going to go and how long this is going to go for. That was the
mm.
next question that I wanted to ask you was, what how are unions, or is there a rough sense of a timeline that unions or that like the news in Australia is kind of putting out there for when
Well,
we're going to get back to normal?
yeah, there is. Um, I would say so. The prime minister and the federal government are basically telling people to prepare for 6 months of this, right?
Wow.
And um, now, when you read between the lines and what they say, they're not saying 6 months of the tightest restrictions that we have now. They're saying 6 months of weirdness, right? Six
Mm.
months of things being different and strange. Um, and then when you look a little further into some of the policies that have been put in place, like say for example the free childcare or the wage subsidy that we have, they're kind of time bound to like 3, 4, 5 months. They're kind of in that kind of range. So like when I kind of pass what they're saying, I hear them. I see kind of like a 2 to 3 month
Mm.
solid restriction, and I guess we're almost a month into that. And then I imagine they're going to relax some things and see how things go. Although I did notice just before we started talking that this federal government's modeling here in Australia says that there could be almost zero new cases by July if the restrictions remain in place. Now, of course, as soon as you remove restrictions, we don't know what happens.
Mhm.
But they're kind of preparing us for 6 months. But I also get the sense that, like any government, they'll open things up as soon as they safely can.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see kind of what happens when they do open it up, right? Like I know
Yeah.
here when I start thinking about that kind of timeline and I start thinking past summer, I go into like my Labor Day planning kind of brain and I start thinking about like, like what will a local Labor Day event look like this year?
Yeah.
Because are people going to be comfortable getting together in smaller areas? Will we still have these kind of loosened restrictions about how large groups were actually able to bring together? So really interesting. What are some of the unions doing there, like a public sector versus private sector? How are the unions kind of going through this?
Well, I think it differs, as you say. Like, I think you have some unions who have seen significant amounts of their membership uh, basically laid off.
Hmm.
So if you're so the shop assistants union, so the SDA, represent people that work in retail, and that's a pretty brutal place to be right now. The wage subsidy has just kind of come online in the last week, so we're kind of yet to see what that will do for retention of staff, whether or not they're kind of working on the floor or they're at home. So it's a bit. I think it's a bit early to see what impact that policy intervention will have on union membership and how durable it is. Also, something to remember is down here in Australia, we essentially have a right to work system.
Hmm.
We don't call it that, but except in some limited cases, there's not kind of a compulsory union membership regime down here. So it is something people can select in and out of, which makes unions vulnerable, of course. So that's just something to keep in mind too. On the public sector side, I think they're all, the unions are trying to protect their members in workplaces, making sure that there's proper social distancing, hygiene, all of the stuff their members need when they go to work in, whether it's offices or whether it's, other outdoor public service type things. There's significant hiring happening in the federal government right now to administer some of these programs.
Hmm.
So I imagine that the public sector unions are working hard to make sure that those people come in as members. And then on the advocacy side, it's called the job keeper payment, which is basically the wage subsidy. That was something the federal government had to be pushed to do. We have a conservative government down here, and it was something that they had to be pushed to do. Unlike in Canada or frankly, even in the UK, where governments kind of just came out with that fairly early on. In Australia, our government resisted that, said it wouldn't work, said it was not feasible. And so the unions and civil society ran a really strong campaign in favor of a wage subsidy and then won. So unions have been kind of strong on the advocacy piece, I would say, throughout this.
The whole right to work part of that must add such an extra layer of challenges to unions right now, right? Because as people are obviously going to be most likely bringing in less money, they're going to start looking for places that potentially they don't need to spend money. And so like a union really has to make its case for how it's providing kind of a value add to members right now. What kind of ways and what kind of ways are unions communicating that to members? Because I'm sure I mean, we're finding some of that struggle here, but the reality is for here, if people are working, if union members are working, they're paying union dues, right? Whereas there, it's almost as if the union has to convince members that it's worth it.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit. It depends a little on how they collect dues, right? So some members here will collect dues through payroll deposit. Basically, the employer will remit dues to the union, as is I think quite normal in North America. And then some unions have moved to a model where they essentially do credit. It's essentially a subscription, right? It's a credit card payment monthly to be a union member, and then it's not tied. The boss doesn't actually have that kind of control anymore over whether the funds are remitted. So a little bit it will depend on how they collect their dues. And for some folks that are potentially stood down or laid off, they will remain a member of the union, in the hopes that when things recover, they'll go back to their job and still be covered by their union. So it could work both ways. You could see folks just basically essentially opting out of union membership as a cost saving measure. And then you could also see folks hanging on to it, whether or not they're currently in a job because of the commitment to the collective and the union. So I think it's probably too soon to tell right now. I don't know that they've even had a monthly cycle since this all started. But I'd say that the way they're communicating value is a lot around safety at work, depending on your industry, and a lot around public campaigns around who is essential. Like we spoke about this a little bit earlier, right? Like our understanding and the public understanding of who's an essential worker has really shifted, I think, in the last couple of weeks. So people that work in grocery stores, people that do freight and delivery and logistics, like, people that clean spaces, people that educate and take care of kids. So I think there's been a lot, unions have been on the front foot here around really claiming that. And I see that as a strategy of also setting up for the recovery and making sure that labor's in a strong position to make sure that these folks that got us through this time aren't left behind when the recovery begins.
Yeah, there's an ironic opportunity amongst all of this, isn't there? I think both to be able to bargain more effectively for our members, to be able to prove essentially the value that we already knew most of our members have. But then also, though, I do think that there's an opportunity for unions to talk to their members now, when their members are at home, when their members need the support, when the members are listening. Unions are now able to talk to their members, and the unions can be a different voice than what I think members are hearing on CNN or Fox, or I don't know what your versions of Fox and ABC or whatever it might be is, but it's just different, right? Like it's hearing from your union president or just hearing from the union, I think provides a different opportunity to kind of communicate with members. And I'm thinking, I know here for sure that there's a lot of unions that are taking advantage of this opportunity. And then I think there's some that are going to be trying to play catch up a little bit.
I think that's a really great point. And I think that I agree with you that there's a huge period of opportunity here for the labor movement to show value to members and potential members and future members outside of what the movement is traditionally kind of understood to provide to people. So I kind of think about, like, right now unions need to be thinking inside the box. So doing all the stuff that unions need to do, representing members, making sure they're safe at work, making sure they have PPE, making sure that, you know, they're not being taken advantage of in the situation when there's perhaps less oversight from different authorities, etc., because we're in such a weird time. But also think outside the box and think, what value can unions as a collective provide to their members that starts to recapture this image that folks have of unions, which has become tarnished in the last 20 or 30 years of, you know, capitalism and neoliberalism. So things that I've been thinking about, that unions could think about doing is, you know, unions don't only need to talk about work and the economy and safety. They should, but there are other things, right? We have email lists of members, we have mobile numbers of members, and we have access to resources and digital platforms as labor unions. Let's show some value by setting up, you know, groups that members might want to join. Maybe your union or your local wants to host a book club, and then once a week or once a month you can jump on the union Zoom and members can discuss. You know, maybe there's a bunch of folks in your local that want to start a knitting club or learn to knit, right? I don't know what the thing might be, but let's look to facilitate the relationships of our members right now, and give them the community and connection that everyone's craving, because unions are really well placed to do that.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I mean, specifically to knitting, I'm all about the knitting, obviously. No, but that's an interesting kind of strategy, right? It's kind of thinking about what are our members doing right now while they're at home, or what would they like to be doing while they're at home? And then how does a union provide the medium and the means to kind of facilitate them to be doing that in a more connected manner?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've certainly noticed in like the last month is like this explosion online of people wanting to connect with each other, like in a real way. Like we used to say, like the internet helps people connect, but like, did it really, like, or was it just like another piece of noise that was in our life, right? Whereas now, so much of the noise is taken out of our life if we're lucky enough to be somewhere safe at home. You know, but people need other people, and we can't see people physically right now. But we do want community and connection, and it's a really great opportunity for unions to kind of model, you know, what social unionism used to be in the mid 20th century, early 20th century, right? Where it was a hub, it was a community hub, and it was about work and it was about bargaining and rights, but it was also about being together in a community and being a collective. And there's an opportunity now, I think, to lean back into that and try some of that stuff out. And I think that something that we need to resist is the urge to be perfect right now, right? Like if you invite a bunch of members on a Zoom meeting and it goes badly and no one knows how to mute, like whatever, like it doesn't matter, right? People will appreciate that you tried. So I think that's important to remember.
And so kind of on that, maybe you mentioned Zoom, right? So I think that's the one that a lot of people are going to, although as we kind of talked about before, they've come under some scrutiny because of some hacking stuff. But what are there kind of specific tools, and this might be a little bit different in Australia than here, although I feel like most of these apps and companies, they span across the globe, right? Is Zoom kind of the one that you've been seeing most people just kind of go to? I know my day job, that's where we've been going to, is Zoom. Are there other kind of tools that you've heard about that people are using? And I know that's a very broad question, and we don't have any sponsorships from any of these companies. Zoom, if you're listening, I'm kind of interested, but we'd have to talk to the other hosts of the Labor Nuts. And I don't know, you have to figure out the whole hacking thing, or I don't even know if that's a real thing. Like, how are you feeling about what apps are available, and like, how seriously do we need to take kind of the media that says that some of them are being hacked and our privacy and all that kind of stuff?
So on the privacy hacking thing, like I think it is a real concern, and I think Zoom has always had those issues. And if you Google back, you will see that there were issues around this before the whole COVID pandemic. But now that Zoom's user base has just exploded basically overnight, we're seeing them and Zoom has kind of become an essential service. So we're seeing this stuff covered in a lot more detail. So it definitely is a problem. If you are discussing stuff on Zoom that is highly sensitive, like I'd be concerned about that. You can do things like set meeting passwords and making sure people are using passwords and not using open links, or you could use a different service. You could use FaceTime. You could use something like that, WhatsApp, Signal, something that's encrypted if you have to have a really sensitive conversation. But for people that are having, their book club or their happy hour on Zoom, I mean, right now, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I guess I use Zoom for pretty much everything. Maybe that will bite me one day, but it hasn't yet. And I think we still have to do things, and we still have to live, right? So take it seriously, but don't stress too much.
Yeah, it is one of those things, like, so I don't even know if you noticed, because I'm still new to this Zoom thing, but I added a password to this Zoom invitation to you, kind of because that was one of the guidelines that was kind of recommended, that if you don't want to get hacked, just throw a password on the invite, and then it'll limit that chance a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think I find it funny that some people complaining about privacy on Facebook has an interesting irony to it. It's like, well, I mean, you're on Facebook.
And these are just these are the trade-offs we make, right? And like I think in a month's time we'll see some better security measures, right? But yes, like, anything we do online has a security risk, has a privacy risk. So the thing is, like, is the thing that you're doing or you're saying, or the information you're typing in, is it something that would be devastating to you if it were public? And if it were, then maybe think about a service that's encrypted. So maybe like WhatsApp or Signal, something like that. If it is just, like you and me talking, this is going on YouTube anyway, so let's have it on Zoom.
That's right. Yeah, I more did it just as a test. I was like, oh, when I send this meeting, I'll add a password to it to see. But you're absolutely right. This is about as public as it gets. Although if somebody hacked in and put something on the screen, although we might get more viewers from that. So
who knows?
Hackers, please go away, hack away.
Careful, hackers, if you're listening.
So what else is what other things would you kind of recommend to unions? I don't want to take up a huge amount of your time. I know where you're at, it's nighttime, but
no, it's 8 a.m. 9 a.m.
Oh, it's 8 a.m.
Good.
Oh, 8 a.m. Okay, well, there you go. So we got all day then.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some other things that you'd like to see unions kind of do during this time?
I think that what's really important, as always, is to have the fundamentals in place. So if you're a union that, over the last couple of years has done things like set up a good email program using something like, Nation Builder, MailChimp, Action Network, whatever the platform is that you choose. I am also not sponsored, sadly. Whatever the platform is that you choose, if you've set up a good email program, you've been emailing your members, regularly, been emailing them content that is useful to them, and they've been opening and engaged with you, you're actually very well set up right now to maybe scale up your communication. So one union that I work with, the Ontario Professional Firefighters Association, so the IAFF affiliate out in Ontario, we've been sending regular updates on COVID-19 as it relates to firefighters, because that's something that's obviously super important to them. We've been talking about PPE. We've been talking about how to treat clothes when you come home from the fire hall, if you've been on calls, and we've been blasting that out to our email list and seeing really, really high engagement rates, way higher than before the pandemic. And then we've also started text blasting out resources to folks as well. So there's a hunger out there for people to get content from you that relates to their job or their lives around this pandemic. And if you have the fundamentals in place, like you have an ability to send text messages, you have a nice clean email list, you're going to be able to take advantage of that. If you don't have those fundamentals in place yet, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, so that's what I was just going to say.
Yeah, it's not too late, and now is the perfect time to do it, because you're probably sitting at home on your computer all the time. And there's folks like me and others that can help you with that. You don't need to let perfect be the enemy of the good again. Get a MailChimp account, get the free one if you're a local, has a small membership, pay a little more if you're a bigger affiliate, and get an email list going, and just say, we're going to email you from time to time. We're gonna give you updates on what the government is doing, what regulations are coming into force that relate to your work, And so email is still a really good one. Email engagement rates across the board have gone up during this pandemic, and anyone listening to this probably is like, oh yeah, I'm checking my email more than ever,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Something else that you should do is try to cultivate community. So email is very, very one directional, right? Like it's like a blast out to people and they don't really kind of talk back to you. But something you can do for more community feel is set up a Facebook group as opposed to a page. You probably already have a page for your union, but a group could be like a local could set up a group for everyone that works at a specific site. Let's say those people are all at home right now, but they still want to be able to like chat and communicate and self-organize and just have a little bit of community. Set up a Facebook group and invite them. You know, like you can just use the basics, do the fundamentals, and then if you're ready to go to that next level, think about things like peer-to-peer texting. Maybe have your stewards designate lists through a service like Hustle or used to be called Relay, now it's called Get Through, Call Hub. Use one of those to have your stewards reach out to members and say, is there anything going on at work that we need to talk about? I'm guessing that folks are having less site meetings, lunch meetings, in-person meetings. So try to replace them with perhaps texting or something else. And then Zoom is a good one, not just because of the platform that it is, but think about how you could use it. So you could have like a weekly like town hall or a weekly briefing with your president, and they could update folks on what the union's doing. They could update folks on measures that are being taken around safety. They could bring in an expert in a different area each week, right? Like they could give a bit of an update. Then they could bring in a teacher to say, like, if you're at home and you're trying to facilitate your kids' education and help the teachers out and deal with these online materials, here's the best way to structure a day for kids. Or bring in a chef and say, like, here's some great easy meals you can cook at home where you don't need a ton of ingredients. Like, basically always looking at ways to provide value in this time. And you can use Zoom to do that. You can use email. You can use Facebook groups. There's a lot of different tools you can use, but like, what can we give people right now that they'll really value, so that when the recovery comes and people go back to work, people look at their union as something that served them in this time, as something that provided value and comfort in this time. And I think what you're going to see after that is really, really good engagement and really good, a real affinity with the union when times, get better.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. I think there's like an opportunity and a little bit of a responsibility to get in front of our members. And I actually think like most unions already have a website. Most unions, though, those websites aren't updated. Now's a great time to update them and actually start using some of those tools that maybe we thought was a good idea 3-4 years ago that we just haven't kind of kept up to date with. Now's a good time to actually, fire up your Facebook account again, and start putting messaging out there. You can even ask your members, there might be members out there that right now would be interested in taking a webinar on doing Facebook or other social media or website building, whatever it might be, right? There's ways that we can really get creative. And at the same time, getting creative, check off a lot of the boxes of things that we've kind of always said, we need to do more of this. And we can check those boxes off the whole time, continuing to provide a service to your members, which is, what we should be doing anyways, right?
Yes.
So I'm really happy you pointed out a bunch of those things, because I think that's important. While this whole COVID thing, absolutely, it isolates us, I think there's an opportunity to kind of bring us closer together through all of this. And we'll start to realize how simple a lot of these tools really are. Like, I know for myself as a quote unquote, an organizer, I think it's going to become a little bit easier to organize things remotely, because people are now realizing how easy a tool like Zoom is. That they're realizing, like, oh, we don't need to all get together at this small meeting room. We should still get together when we can, but we're able to kind of facilitate getting together, in quotation marks, a lot easier now because of the tools that are available. This time has just kind of forced us into using a lot of those tools.
And I think for unions, it's also some of the resistance in the past has been around cost, right? Even though I would argue a lot of these tools are actually like pretty dirt
Yeah.
cheap, especially the kind of Zooms of the world. But now we're really going to see that there's a real cost saving, there's a real efficiency to using these tools really well, especially as members are happy to participate in them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even as we move out of the harshest restrictions, and it seems like the curve is flattening there in Canada and in some places, and it is here in Australia, and that will continue because experts know what they're doing, and we're listening to them. But people are still going to be wary about coming together in groups for a while, like for quite a while, I would say. So this isn't going to be something that kind of just happens for a few months. We're all on Zoom, and then like a few years later, we're like, remember when we were all on Zoom that time? It's like,
Yeah.
no, this is going to continue. We're going to continue to use different ways of organizing. We're going to do digital organizing. It's going to become more central to what we do as people are just wary about getting together in groups, and particularly if you have vulnerable members of the population in your membership, or if you're frankly a healthcare union, right? So like what we do now is really setting us up for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's not just about putting a band-aid over this for right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is real. Like this digital transformation for unions has been kind of almost coming for a really long time, like almost there, and now it's here.
Yeah, you're right. All right, friend. If people are looking to get a hold of you, because like as you said, you still do work with unions in Canada, of course. If people are looking to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
Yeah, so they can send me an email at jack@pacificdigital.ca, or they can head to my website at pacificdigital.ca. I work a ton with Canadian unions. Probably still more than half of my work is over there in Canada. I was actually due back very soon for a whole bunch of work, but that won't be happening for a little while. Who knows when we'll be crossing borders again? But would love to connect with folks. Even if you just have questions about anything that we talked about, or you need some ideas, I'm happy to just chat. I mean, this is what we're doing, right? We're just connecting with each other now and just talking.
Yeah, and Jack, you're a great guy, a good friend, and yeah, I'm happy that we were able to make this. I think we were connecting with each other over Facebook to see how we were doing, and then it was like, hey, we should do a podcast. we can figure it out.
You took it to a whole new level with this amazing studio setup you've got here. I'm here at the beach.
Right?
I can feel the ocean spray. The boat is still here.
It's labor knots, man. That's what we do. We are going to put your contacts in our links. Thank you very much for coming on, Jack. If you haven't already, especially for people in Australia that potentially haven't listened to the Labor Knots, feel free to follow us at Labor Knots. If you'd like to follow me on all things social media, I'm at Say Hi to Carlos. Thanks a lot, man. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Take it easy and stay safe.
I will. You as well.